The queen had always carried a deep sense of responsibility when it came to her daughter. From the day the princess was born, she promised to keep her safe and ensure her future was bright. The queen believed that a royal marriage was not just about two people, but about the stability of the kingdom, the strength of alliances, and the reputation of the crown. For years she had carefully considered suitors from noble families and foreign lands. Handsome princes, wealthy lords, and proud generals came forward, each one eager to win the hand of the princess. But to the queen's sharp eyes, none of them seemed good enough. Some were charming in words but weak in actions, others were rich in gold but poor in kindness. The queen quietly rejected them all, waiting for someone truly worthy. One afternoon, when the queen was sitting in the palace garden surrounded by the fragrance of roses, her daughter entered with a glow on her face. The princess looked different that day. Her steps were lighter, her smile brighter. Behind her walked a man the queen had never seen before. He wasn't dressed like a prince or a nobleman. His clothes were simple, almost too plain for the royal halls. His boots carried dust from the road, his hands looked rough from work, and his eyes, though calm, spoke of struggles the palace had never known. The queen's heart tightened. She watched the way her daughter stood beside him, close enough to show she trusted him. The princess's hand brushed against his as if it belonged there naturally, without fear of judgment. The queen's chest filled with both worry and disbelief. Was this really the man her daughter wanted to bring before her? The court ladies, standing at a distance, whispered among themselves. Their fans half covered their lips as their eyes darted toward the man in curiosity and hidden laughter. A murmur ran through the garden like a quiet wind. Who was this stranger who dared to stand in the queen's presence without fine clothes or titles? Finally, the queen spoke, her voice low but filled with authority. She leaned closer to her daughter and whispered words that carried weight. That man? Her eyes narrowed as she studied him from head to toe. She wanted to believe this was some misunderstanding, that her daughter had brought him for some other purpose. But the way the princess held herself told another story. The princess did not flinch. She did not look ashamed or uncertain. Instead, she stood taller, her chin slightly lifted, her eyes soft but firm. She looked at her mother, and in that moment, there was no hesitation in her heart. Calmly, with a voice steady and clear, she replied, "He's the one I married." The queen's breath caught. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to freeze around her. The sounds of the garden faded. The whispers of the court ladies turned into silence, and even the wind seemed to hold still. Married? The word echoed in the queen's mind like a bell struck in a quiet hall. Her daughter, the princess of the kingdom, had chosen a husband without her knowledge, without her blessing, without following the traditions of the crown, and not just any man, but this man, a stranger with no sign of noble blood or great wealth. The queen's heart wrestled between emotions. Anger tried to rise, but it was chained by love for her daughter. Fear crept in, whispering of what the kingdom would say, how the nobles would mock, how foreign rulers might see it as weakness. But at the same time, a strange curiosity grew inside her. She wanted to know what kind of man had won her daughter's heart so completely that she would take such a bold step. The man stood quietly through it all. He did not lower his eyes in shame, nor did he try to boast or speak in his defense. His silence was not weak. It carried a quiet strength. He seemed to understand the weight of the moment, yet he did not tremble. The queen noticed this, even though she did not admit it aloud. The princess moved closer to him, her hand brushing against his sleeve as if to assure him that he was not alone. The gesture did not escape the queen's notice either. It was not the kind of touch that came from excitement or sudden affection. It was steady, familiar, and natural, like two people who had walked many roads together, who had already faced trials side by side. For the queen, this moment was the beginning of a storm. Questions raced through her mind. Who was he? Where had he come from? What had her daughter seen in him that she had not seen in any noble suitor? And above all, why had her daughter kept this marriage a secret until now? Her daughter's eyes held an answer the queen could not yet understand. There was no guilt in them, no fear, only quiet certainty. It was the kind of certainty that a ruler rarely saw in matters of the heart. The queen realized that whatever story lay behind her daughter's choice, it was strong enough to bring her here, strong enough to make her stand boldly before her mother, even against centuries of tradition. The queen remained silent for a long while, watching the man and her daughter together. The garden around them was still, the air heavy with unspoken words. The queen knew this was not the end of the matter. It was only the beginning of a larger story, one that would test her daughter, the man, and even her own beliefs about love, loyalty, and the true measure of worth. In that quiet garden, with roses blooming and whispers still hanging in the air, the queen's heart stirred with both dread and wonder. The princess's words hung in the air like a spark that could set the whole palace aflame. The queen sat frozen, unable to speak for a long moment. Around them, the whispers of the court ladies grew louder, carrying both shock and curiosity. But the princess did not let the silence frighten her. Her face was calm, her voice steady, and her eyes full of certainty. She looked straight at her mother and repeated softly, "Yes, mother. He is the one I married." The queen's mind was full of questions, but the princess, seeing the storm on her mother's face, took a gentle step forward. She knew she had to explain. This was not a decision made in haste, nor was it a foolish choice. It was something she had thought about deeply, something that had changed her heart forever. She began to tell the story of how they met. It was not inside the safety of the palace or through the formal introductions arranged by noble families. No, it was far away from the throne room, during one of her secret journeys outside the palace walls. The princess had always been curious about the world beyond the gates, about how ordinary people lived, about their struggles and joys. She had disguised herself many times, slipping out quietly with only a trusted maid, wandering through villages and markets. It was on one such day, she explained, that she found herself in a crowded marketplace. She had wandered too far from her maid, lost in the colors of fabrics and the laughter of children playing near the stalls. That was when trouble struck. A group of rough men had noticed her fine speech and her delicate clothes beneath the disguise. They thought she was a merchant's daughter carrying wealth, and they tried to corner her. Fear gripped her heart, but before she could cry for help, someone stepped in. It was this man. He didn't ask who she was, nor did he hesitate. With steady courage, he stood between her and the men, protecting her without a thought for his own safety. His words were firm, his stance unshaken, and within moments the men backed away, realizing this stranger was not someone they could easily overpower. The princess never forgot the way he looked at her, not with pity, not with arrogance, but with simple concern for her safety. From that moment, she wanted to know more about him. She soon learned that he was not a noble, not a man with riches or land, but someone who worked with his hands, someone who lived humbly and quietly among villagers. Yet, he carried himself with a dignity that even many princes lacked. He did not treat her like a fragile jewel, nor did he try to impress her with empty words. He spoke honestly, asked questions about her thoughts, and listened carefully to her answers. For the first time in her life, the princess felt like someone saw her not as a crown, not as a symbol of power, but as a woman with dreams and fears of her own. The queen listened, her heart torn. She could see the fire in her daughter's eyes as she spoke. The princess was not describing a passing fancy. She was describing a bond built slowly, like stone upon stone, strong and unshaken. The princess's voice softened as she continued, telling her mother how she had spent many secret days learning from him, walking among common folk, and understanding life in a way she never could from inside the palace. "He is kind, mother," the princess said with quiet passion. "He helps those who have nothing, even when he himself has little. He has faced hardships that most men of the court could never endure. Yet he does not complain. He never knew I was a princess when we first spoke, and still, he showed me more respect than men who bowed before the throne. With him, I am not just a princess. I am myself." The queen's eyes softened slightly, but she kept her lips pressed tight. She could not show her emotions so easily. The weight of the crown demanded caution, not quick acceptance. Still, the princess's words stirred something inside her. Memories of her own youth when she too had longed for freedom before duty had bound her. The man, until now silent, finally spoke. His voice was low but firm, carrying honesty without fear. He said he had never intended to win the heart of a princess, nor did he desire riches or titles. He simply cared for her because of who she was, not what she was. He spoke of his own life, of the struggles of ordinary people, and how he believed a person's worth was not measured by birth, but by the strength of their actions. His words were simple, but they held truth. Even the queen, though she tried not to show it, felt their weight. The princess reached for his hand then, holding it tightly as if to show her mother the depth of their bond. It was not the grasp of someone clinging to a fleeting fancy. It was steady, full of trust, full of certainty. She looked at her mother and said, "You taught me to value honesty and courage. You told me a ruler must be strong but also kind. He has all of those things, mother. I did not choose him out of rebellion. I chose him because with him, I see the life I want, not just the life duty demands." The queen's chest rose and fell with a deep breath. She felt the weight of tradition pressing against the warmth of her daughter's conviction. The court ladies still whispered, their eyes wide with disbelief. The palace guards shifted uncomfortably, as if unsure whether they were watching a family matter or the beginning of a scandal. But the queen remained silent, her thoughts deep. She saw clearly now that her daughter was not a child anymore. She was a woman who had made a choice, and she stood by it without fear. That strength reminded the queen of herself long ago, before the crown had hardened her heart with caution. And though she could not yet say it aloud, a part of her began to wonder if perhaps the princess had chosen more wisely than anyone could see in that moment. The garden was still, the air heavy with tension but also with something unspoken. Hope. The queen's doubt had not vanished, but the seed of understanding had been planted. And though she did not yet give her blessing, she no longer saw just that man. She began to see the faint outline of the story her daughter was trying to share. The queen could not rest that night. She walked slowly through the halls of the palace, her long robes brushing against the marble floors, her mind tangled with questions. Her daughter's words echoed again and again. "He's the one I married." The queen had heard many bold statements in her lifetime, but none had unsettled her like this. Her daughter had always been gentle, obedient, and respectful of tradition. Yet now she had taken the greatest step of her life without the queen's approval. The queen was not ready to accept this man as her son-in-law simply because her daughter spoke of love and kindness. A kingdom could not be built on feelings alone. Trust, loyalty, and strength had to be proven, not spoken. She decided she would test him. If he truly carried the worth her daughter believed, then he would show it through his actions, not just words. The next morning, the queen summoned the man to the palace hall. The nobles gathered, curious and eager to witness this stranger's first steps into the world of royalty. Many of them had already judged him before he entered. They sneered, whispering to one another about his plain clothes, his simple manner, and his lack of noble blood. Some even laughed quietly, mocking the princess for choosing him over princes who had arrived with gold, jewels, and promises of power. When the man walked into the hall, he did not shrink before their stares. His clothes were simple, his boots still bore the marks of travel, and his hands were not smooth like theirs but calloused from work. Yet he walked with a steady step, not too proud, not too timid. His eyes did not dart about nervously. Instead, he looked at each person calmly, as if seeing them as equals, not as people above him or beneath him. The queen watched carefully. She noticed the nobles trying to provoke him. One lord made a cruel remark about his appearance. Another mocked his lack of wealth. But the man did not respond with anger or defensiveness. He simply listened, then bowed his head slightly in respect. His silence was not weakness. It was strength. the kind that came from not allowing others to control his emotions. The queen was not fully impressed yet. Politeness could be learned, and patience could be pretended. She wanted to see more. She wanted to see how he would act when faced with real challenge, not just words. As fate would have it, the opportunity came sooner than expected. Later that day, chaos broke out in the palace stables. A fire had started, quickly spreading through the wooden beams and straw. Horses screamed, stable boys shouted, and smoke rose high into the air. The guards rushed in, but many hesitated, afraid of the flames. The nobles stepped back, unwilling to risk their fine clothes or their safety. But the man did not hesitate. Without waiting for orders, he ran straight toward the fire. He pulled open the heavy doors, letting the frightened animals escape. He grabbed buckets of water alongside the servants, his hands working as tirelessly as theirs. When a young stable boy became trapped inside, coughing from the smoke, the man rushed in without thought for himself. He carried the boy out, shielding him with his own body from the falling sparks. The queen watched from the courtyard, her heart pounding. For a moment she had forgotten that this was the man she doubted. All she saw was courage, pure, uncalculated courage. The nobles who had mocked him earlier now stood silent, their eyes wide. Not one of them had moved to help. Yet this stranger had risked everything without hesitation. When the fire was finally put out and the horses were safe, the man stood covered in soot and sweat. His clothes were burned at the edges, his hands blistered from the heat. But his face carried no complaint, only relief that lives had been saved. The stable boy clung to him, tears of gratitude running down his cheeks. The queen felt something shift in her heart. She had seen bravery before on battlefields where men fought for glory, power, or pride. But this bravery was different. It was not for fame, not for reward, not for recognition. It was simple and pure, born out of care for others. That evening, the palace was filled with whispers once again. Servants spoke of the man's courage, guards repeated the story to one another, and even some nobles admitted quietly that they had misjudged him. Yet still, the queen held her silence. She could not allow one moment, however great, to decide the future of her daughter and the kingdom. She had to know if this man's heart was as steady as it seemed. She decided to spend more time observing him. She invited him to meals where the nobles continued their quiet mockery, waiting for him to falter. But again he remained calm, speaking little but always with respect. When he did speak, his words were thoughtful, never meant to impress, but always sincere. The queen found herself listening closely, even when she wanted not to. She noticed how he treated the palace servants. While many nobles ignored them as if they were invisible, he greeted them with warmth. He thanked them for their service, and in his presence, their faces lit up with smiles. The queen realized that respect from him was not something he gave only to those with crowns or titles. It was something he gave to everyone, as if every person held value in his eyes. Still, doubt lingered in the queen's mind. Was this truly who he was? Or was he only showing his best self because he was being watched? She wanted to believe in him, but the crown had taught her to be cautious, to trust actions repeated over time, not just single moments of goodness. Yet, when she looked at her daughter, she saw something she could not ignore. The princess's eyes shone with quiet pride whenever she watched him. It was not the blind adoration of a young girl, but the calm assurance of a woman who knew she had chosen wisely. The princess had always been gentle, but now she seemed stronger, braver, almost as if his courage had passed into her as well. The queen began to wonder if perhaps her daughter had seen something she herself had overlooked for too long. She still had not given her approval, and she still wrestled with the weight of tradition and expectation. But one truth had become impossible to deny. The man had faced judgment, fire, and cruelty, and each time he had stood steady. And though the queen had set out to test him, it was she herself who began to feel tested in her ability to see beyond titles, to judge beyond wealth, and to open her heart to a different kind of strength. The palace was quiet that night, but in the queen's heart, The storm had only grown louder. She knew this story was far from over. The days that followed were filled with quiet observation. The queen watched the man closely, seeking a truth that could not be hidden by polite words or careful manners. She arranged opportunities for him to interact with the people of the palace, and even with visiting nobles. Each time he behaved as he had before, calm, honest, respectful, and full of a quiet strength that could not be ignored. Still, the queen wondered what drove him to act this way. Was it pride, duty, or something deeper? She needed to know more. One afternoon, she invited him into her private chambers under the pretense of discussing palace matters. The man entered respectfully, bowing slightly, but not with excessive formality. The queen studied him as he stood, in the sunlit room, noticing the way he carried himself, the steadiness in his gaze. She began cautiously, asking questions not about courage or heroism but about his life, his choices, and his past. He spoke simply, but his words revealed a depth that many nobles had never reached in their lifetimes. He had grown up in a small village, far from the palaces and riches of the kingdom. From a young age, he had learned the value of hard work and responsibility. His parents had taught him kindness, honesty, and humility, and these lessons had shaped him into the man he was today. He spoke of hardships he had faced, of people he had helped, and of moments when he had chosen to do what was right rather than what was easy. The queen listened silently. She had expected him to be proud of his accomplishments or perhaps defensive about his humble beginnings. But there was no arrogance, no need to prove himself. What she heard was the story of a man who had chosen his path carefully, guided by integrity and wisdom rather than ambition. As he spoke, the queen realized something important. She had feared that her daughter's love for him was based on surface, charm, or fleeting emotion. But now she could see why the princess had chosen him. The man had lived a life full of quiet courage and thoughtfulness, and those qualities had not gone unnoticed by the princess. She understood that her daughter had fallen for something deeper than looks or status. She had fallen for character itself. The man continued, explaining how he had first met the princess without knowing her true identity. He remembered the day, vividly. A young woman lost and frightened. Someone who seemed delicate but had a spark of determination in her eyes. He had acted simply because he could not stand to see someone in danger, yet he had never expected to meet her again, let alone become part of her life. He spoke of the days they had spent together afterward, how they had shared stories, worked side by side helping villagers, and discovered mutual respect and understanding. The queen could see the sincerity in his eyes, the honesty in every word. For the first time, she felt a shift inside herself. The man she had doubted, who had seemed too simple, too unrefined for her daughter, now appeared as someone of remarkable strength and wisdom. His life had been one of humility, yet it was a life full of decisions that required courage, intelligence, and heart. Still, the queen had one final test in mind. She needed to see how he handled true adversity, something that could not be staged or rehearsed. Days later, a message arrived that a group of villagers nearby was facing a sudden flood. Houses were at risk and the people were struggling to escape with their belongings. The queen sent word to the man, asking him to go and assist them. While the nobles debated what was wise, he did not hesitate. Without seeking permission or recognition, he rode out immediately, determined to help those in need. When he returned, the queen and the princess waited in the palace gardens. The man was tired, his clothes wet and worn, but he carried a quiet satisfaction in his expression. He spoke of the villagers' gratitude, of how the community had worked together to protect their homes, and of how small acts of courage and kindness could change lives. The queen saw how his actions were consistent with his words. He did not seek praise or reward. He acted because it was right. The princess stepped forward, her face glowing with pride. She took his hand, squeezing it gently. The queen watched the two of them together and realized that their bond was built on trust, shared values, and mutual respect. This was not a fleeting romance, but a partnership of equals, each bringing out the best in the other. In that moment, the queen began to understand the truth she had been reluctant to accept. She had feared the unknown, the break from tradition, and the whispers of nobles who valued status above all else. Yet here was a man whose life, character, and actions had proven themselves time and time again. He was not noble by birth, but he was noble in the qualities that truly mattered: courage, integrity, and selflessness. Slowly, the queen felt her resistance begin to dissolve. She realized that her daughter had not chosen poorly. She had chosen wisely, guided by intuition and experience that only comes from knowing someone's heart. The man had faced every test with humility and strength, demonstrating the qualities that the queen had long valued, even if she had expected to find them in someone of noble blood. That evening, as the sun set and the palace grew quiet, the queen reflected on everything she had seen. She understood that true worth was not measured by wealth, titles, or appearances, but by the choices a person made when no one was watching. She recognized the man not only as someone worthy of her daughter's love, but as someone who could stand beside the princess as an equal, as a partner, and as a guide in the many challenges life would bring. The queen finally allowed herself a small, private smile. She still had responsibilities, and she still had the eyes of the kingdom to consider, but she no longer doubted the heart of the man her daughter had chosen. In her own way, she began to accept him, seeing him as more than a stranger or a humble commoner, but as a man of true character and strength, worthy of the princess's love and respect. In those quiet moments, the queen felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. A new chapter was beginning for the family, one that promised love, courage, and the kind of partnership that could withstand any trial. She realized that sometimes the heart sees what tradition cannot, and that the courage to follow love and truth could change not just one life, but an entire kingdom. The palace was quiet in the early morning, the first light of day spilling through the tall windows and casting long shadows on the marble floors. The queen sat in her private chambers, reflecting on the events of the past weeks. She had watched the man closely, tested him in small and meaningful ways, and seen how he had faced challenges with courage, wisdom, and humility. She had seen the way he treated the people of the palace, how he cared for servants and strangers alike, and how he had earned the trust and admiration of all who knew him. Slowly, the queen realized that her initial doubts had been replaced by respect. This was a man whose heart and mind were strong enough to stand beside her daughter. Word of his deeds had spread throughout the kingdom. The nobles who once whispered and mocked now began to recognize his worth. Some were reluctant, holding to old traditions, but many could not deny the truth they had witnessed. The man possessed qualities that mattered more than wealth, titles, or royal blood. Courage, honesty, kindness. These were the foundations of true nobility, and he had them in abundance. The princess, meanwhile, had grown even more confident. She no longer felt the need to hide her choice or defend her husband constantly. She walked through the halls of the palace with a calm assurance, proud of the life she was building with the man she loved. They spent their days together planning charitable projects for villagers, listening to concerns of the people, and sharing quiet moments in the palace gardens. In every action, their partnership grew stronger, and their love became a steady light that could not be dimmed by doubts or whispers. The queen knew it was time to act. She summoned the court and gathered the nobles in the grand hall. The air was filled with anticipation, for everyone knew that the queen had always been a figure of authority, wisdom, and discernment. When she entered, the room fell silent. Her voice, calm and steady, carried across the hall as she addressed the court. "My lords and ladies," she began, "I have observed the man my daughter chose to marry. I have tested him, watched him, and seen the strength of his character. I have seen his courage, his kindness, and his respect for all people, great and small, and I have seen the love he shares with my daughter, which is steady, true, and honorable." A hush fell over the room. Some nobles shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. The queen continued, her voice carrying both authority and warmth. "Perhaps we have been wrong to measure a person's worth solely by birth or riches. Perhaps true nobility is not in titles but in actions. Today I give my blessing to this marriage. The princess has chosen a man worthy of her heart, and I see now that he is a man worthy of our respect." The princess stepped forward, her eyes shining with joy. She took her husband's hand, holding it firmly as the queen spoke. For the first time, the queen saw the full measure of their bond, not just in words, but in the way they moved together, the way they spoke to each other, the quiet understanding in their eyes. It was a partnership built on trust, respect, and love. The man bowed deeply before the queen, his humility evident even in this moment of recognition. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he said, his voice sincere. "I have always sought only to do what is right and to care for those around me. To have your blessing is the greatest honor I could receive." The queen nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. She saw now that her daughter's choice had not been impulsive or naive. It had been guided by wisdom, experience, and the ability to see what truly mattered. The court watched in silence, absorbing the weight of her words and the undeniable truth of the man before them. Over the following weeks, preparations for a formal ceremony began. The palace was alive with excitement, the halls decorated with flowers and banners celebrating a union that symbolized not just love, but change. Villagers and citizens of the kingdom heard of the marriage, and many came to witness the joining of the princess and her husband. They saw that nobility could come from heart and action, not merely from wealth or bloodline, and it inspired hope in the hearts of all who watched. The wedding day arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. The princess walked through the halls, her gown flowing, her eyes fixed on the man who had won her heart. He stood patiently, waiting with humility and quiet pride. The queen watched them both, her heart full. She saw not just a husband and wife, but a partnership that could guide the kingdom with courage, kindness, and wisdom. As they exchanged vows, the words spoken were simple but powerful. Promises were made not of riches or status, but of loyalty, support, and love. The crowd watched in awe, moved not just by the ceremony but by the meaning behind it. This marriage was not just a union of two people. It was a union of values, of hearts, and of a vision for a better future. The queen stepped forward at the conclusion of the ceremony, placing a hand gently on her daughter's shoulder. "You have chosen well," she said softly, her voice carrying warmth and pride. "May your life together be filled with love, courage, and the strength to face any challenge." The princess smiled, leaning slightly toward her mother. "Thank you, Mother. I could not have done this without your guidance even when I tested it." The man nodded respectfully, his eyes meeting the queen's. "I will do my best to honor the trust and love of both of you," he said. From that day forward, the kingdom began to change. The story of the princess and the man she married became a symbol of hope. People spoke of courage, kindness, and respect as the true measures of worth. The queen continued to guide the family with wisdom, now embracing the man as part of her own family. The princess and her husband worked together to improve the lives of those around them, earning admiration and love from people far and wide. The queen often reflected on the lessons she had learned. She had learned that love could guide decisions more wisely than tradition alone. She had learned that courage and kindness could outweigh titles and wealth. And most importantly, she had learned to see beyond appearances, to judge character by actions and heart rather than by birth or status. In the end, the princess had married not just a man, but a life of purpose, integrity, and partnership. And the queen, once cautious and doubtful, now watched with pride as her daughter and son-in-law built a life that would inspire generations to come. Together they showed that the greatest strength in a kingdom was not in power or wealth, but in love, trust, and the courage to follow one's heart. The palace was no longer just a place of tradition. It was a place of hope, respect, and the promise that true nobility could come from anyone who lived with honor. And in the quiet moments, when the sun set over the castle walls and the gardens bloomed with life, the queen could finally smile fully, knowing her daughter had chosen wisely, and that the man she had doubted had proven himself worthy in every way that mattered.